Microphone on. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee today, Thursday, the 22nd of June. I am very pleased to see so many returning members. Congratulations on winning your seats at the election, and also very pleased to see David Fowler still join with us. Just about. We have one new member, but we'll get on to apologies when we get to that point in the meeting. Sorry, we have two new members. We have also Councillor David Wickerson joining the committee. You're very welcome. I'd like to also welcome Cabinet members Councillor Cowan and Councillor Webb. Thank you for joining us. And Councillor William Richmond, who is also joined us here this morning. So thank you very much indeed for attending. In that case, let's move on to item 1 on our agendas, which is on page 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February 2023. I'm not going to take them page by page. They are pages 4 to 17. And does any member of the committee have any comment on those minutes for accuracy only? Agreed. Are you happy that I sign them as a true and accurate record? Agreed. Thank you. Smashing. So, actions arising from the minutes. Any member have any action? I have none. No? Okay. Apologies. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I have no apologies.
Okay. Right. We move to urgent business, which is...
Chairman, there's 3 members here with no mic.
Right. Okay. Julie, could we sort out a microphone for our esteemed Deputy Chairman? I don't know. We'll find out when you press the thing. Do you want to try it? So let's see what happens when you...
Hello?
Right. No. Okay. Well,
no, it thinks I'm over
everybody's going to have the benefit of hearing you, but they're not seeing you, I'm afraid. But okay, so we have no apologies, we've no urgent business. Right, declarations of interest. Item 5. Does any member have any declaration of interest they wish to make which is not already on their formal list of interests? None? Thank you. Non-members wishing to address the meeting, we have, as I said, Councillors Cowan, Webb and Richmond. You're very welcome to participate. Training item, standing item. Well, some of the committee attended the internal audit training this morning, and there has been more general audit training since the election. Have members been happy with that? Councillor Cowan.
There's governance training next Tuesday, which is Rory and the solicitor.
Okay, so members, there was another opportunity for further training. Any other comments on that item before I go on to the next one? Okay, so item 8, Quarter 1 Strategic Risk Report on page 18 of your agendas, and we have Ryan Pack here to present the report. Oh, sorry, well, we have the Cabinet member, Councillor Webb. We'll start with you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to bring the Quarter 1 Risk Report to Governance and Audit today and want to welcome the new members of the committee. I thought it would be useful to start off today by setting out what the risk report deals with. The risks included within the report are what the Council defines as strategic risks. These are risks which impact the delivery of our corporate plan, which we bring to this committee to make sure that everyone agrees we are correctly managing them. In terms of the risks themselves, this has been a static period for the Council, with the risk scores not changing since the committee last saw them. However, this is not to say that work isn't being done to mitigate them, but the work is not yet at a stage where it has an impact to bring the risk down. A really good example of this is the joint venture the council is in regarding nutrient neutrality, where a lot of work has gone into getting the venture set up, but it is not yet at the stage where it can mitigate the risk further. I'm now going to hand over to Ryan, who will cover off some of the more technical aspects of this report. Thank you.
Wonderful morning, everyone. Just to quickly add to that introduction, so as we said, there's not been loads of risk movement this quarter. As you can see from the notes, that doesn't mean there hasn't been work done, especially looking at stuff like the nutrient neutrality, risk with the joint venture, as well as looking at stuff like the waste consultation, where it's just a case of we sort of know what the route to mitigation is going to look like there. It's just a case of waiting for stuff to fall into place so we can actually lower that risk rather than preemptively lowering it. The only additional point to make is you'll see there's been some slight changes to some of the risks in terms of the inclusion of key risk indicators and key control indicators. So this has been something we've sort of previously discussed and we'll look to enshrine more when we bring the revised risk policy through in Q2. Essentially what we're trying to do by introducing these is a key risk indicator obviously gives an idea of the level of risk to sort of back up your impact, and a key control indicator gives an idea of how effective your controls are being. So it's just an additional way for the committee just to measure whether we're scoring those risks at the correct level. But obviously, as always, I'm happy to take any questions anyone's got.
Thank you, Ryan. Committees, over to you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I've looked through the Q1. I mean, one of the things that leaps out, particularly with the sort of national financial situation going forward, and also today's heralded potential interest rate rise, is around temporary accommodation and also the increased demand for housing services. Whilst that's at 16, some things I appreciate are going to be outside the council's control. But I'm assuming that the senior management team will be keeping an eye on that in terms of whether there needs to be any flexibility in resources and advice, for that department. Thank you.
So I'll handle the housing side of it, and then if Ali's got anything she wants to add from the financial side of it, I'll do that. Yeah, it's going to be one of our more long-term risks, especially that housing demand one, because that's ultimately something we can't really control in terms of demand into the camp. So it's how we deal with that. The temporary accommodation risk, is a little bit brighter to an extent in that we have got greater control in what we can do by buying additional units, and obviously that allows us to claim back some of the housing benefit for people that go into those units, so it's at less of a cost to the council to use temporary accommodation. But yeah, it's a risk we're monitoring. It is going to be a long-term risk because, as you say, there is wider sort of national implications as to why we're in that situation. But yeah, it's certainly something we're monitoring.
Thank you. Ali.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, on the financial side, we have invested in some houses, as Ryan said, and we've also increased the budget this year for temporary accommodation. And in addition, we have just received in the last month or so some government funding, which will help us support additional staff in that area. So yes, we're monitoring it all the time, and where we need to put more financial resource in, we're trying to do that.
Okay, just on that issue, I think one of the key drivers of this, and it's in the risk, is a reduction in the availability of rental property. And I am concerned about the government's rental reform bill, which will exacerbate that and pull more capital out of the private rented sector. It seems to me that with the, and I think that will have quite a dramatic effect. In that if people can't protect their capital or their income flows, they won't invest it in private rented property. And I think one of the key driver of the reduction in the availability of rental property is people exiting from being landlords in the private rented sector. And I think this has started as a result of the reduction of the tax reliefs to landlords. But I also think the increase in interest rates, if landlords' mortgages are going up and they can't increase the rent, then I think that they will withdraw from the market. So I do think there might be a role for lobbying government policy in this area in order to protect the Breckland budget, because our costs have significantly increased, if you look at this, for temporary accommodation as a result of people not being able to be found accommodation. So I just wonder if part of the mitigation should be engaging with other local authorities to the government on the issue of making a sustainable private rental sector, so that we don't see a shrink of supply in available property, which has already started, and that is referenced in the issue. I don't know if you've got any comment on that, Ryan, or you could take it away.
No, I'm happy to take that away back to the risk owner and potentially add that in. Yeah.
Smashing. Thank you. So I've got next Councillor Clark, Councillor Kybird, David Fowler, and then Councillor Monument. Sorry, we've done Councillor Clark. Sorry, Councillor Kybird.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to say something very similar to what you just said about the rental market. Two questions. Where do we obtain data on rental prices and how they're moving? And does the rent allowance paid by the government increase as the market conditions show an increase in rentals?
I'd have to take both those questions away to get an answer from that, Councillor, but I'm happy to email you back about that.
It's quite a technical question. I understand that, and I would expect nothing less from our Deputy Chairman. So, David Fowler.
Thanks, Chair.
I'm calling you that because we have two Davids on the committee.
Oh, that's fair enough.
So,
apologies, I've lost my voice. Page 25 on nutrient neutrality. On the paragraph latest note, we've got a lot of adverses in there. Do we have some definition of these terminologies? Adverse, avoid. So in that sentence there, the last sentence, should be noted that the upper limit for the adverse risk appetite, meaning this risk sits on the cusp of being an adverse risk. I think some definition of these would be helpful. That's my point. And then on page 33, we're missing an action plan, I think, aren't we? Yeah. Action plan missing on page 33. That's it. Thanks, Chair.
So in terms of adverse avoid stuff like that, that comes from our risk appetite statement, which I did think we include under Appendix 2, but we've not included it. It's in our risk policy. So basically that breaks down into, depending on the score that we give it, what the council's position is in the approach to the risk. Does it need to take action? Does it need to just monitor the risk to ensure it doesn't get worse, et cetera, et cetera. But I can share that with the committee afterwards. But yeah, that's where that terminology comes from. In terms of the action plan around the contract monitoring risk, the action is essentially that we are just monitoring those contracts. There's no specific action plan in there at the moment around those contracts to lower that risk. It's already a relatively, I just want to double check the score, I believe it's a relatively low risk for us. But that's why there's not a specific action plan there at the moment, because we're not taking specific actions to lower that risk.
I would just come in there because I think when we get to the internal audit later on, there is concern around procurement and contract management. So maybe we can review that till we've had the discussion on the internal audit bit, and then maybe we'll come back to that. But I don't want to pull the agenda out of order, but I do think there is probably something that does need to go in there. Is it on the same thing, or do I put you back on the bottom of the list? Okay, no, that's fine. I've got you again. So, Councillor Monument.
A couple of points. Page 35, it's a small point, but under potential consequences, we're left with a cliffhanger. It says specific risks related to policy contain further nothing. No word, no conclusion. I have another one regarding definitions, but do you know what the word should be? Or can you tell us another day?
Sorry, that's come in on the mic.
Sorry.
I will have to go back and clarify that. Essentially with that one, what we are, the two major risks we've got at the moment policy-wise are the neutrality and waste consultation risks. I would just need to speak to the risk owner around what the other emerging government policy risks are, but there's no major ones which I'm aware of under that. But obviously, as we've discussed today around rental reform, stuff like that, this risk will potentially change depending on that, but I will just clarify that.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'm generally very happy with the reports themselves. But if you move from page 35, page 36, you come to what is described as Appendix
B.
Appendix B, Breckland Council Risk Matrix. Now, if I were a new member here, I would be really annoyed to find that after I've slogged through all the other things. This explains what they're all about, their colours, their definitions, their ratings. Why, and this happens in other places too, why do we always get that right at the end, after we've wondered what it was all about? And it's described as a matrix, it's not described as key risk definitions, so that a newbie might say, oh, I'll read that first. It always seems to end up at the end, after you've tried to work it out piecemeal.
Well, just on that, while we try to make these reports perfect, but maybe perhaps at the introduction we could have a clearer signpost to that, so that people could pick it up and go and find it, and then read the report. If that'd be all right, I think. I wouldn't necessarily want to change the order, but maybe we need a better signpost.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. Just the very, very boring reason as to why it's Appendix B rather than Appendix A is because the main report is around the risk. So if we put that as Appendix A rather than Appendix B, but I'm happy to include it more in the covering report and explain in clear words. So one around this in Appendix B and what it is, and two, we'll include that risk appetite statement moving forward as well to pick up on that previous point.
Okay, so we're now back to Councillor Kybird.
Just on that comment, that it needs to be the matrix reloaded, I think. Going back to the waste consultation, you said that the main risk areas include the deposit retention scheme. Can you explain what that is?
So I believe that is around plastic bottle collection deposits. It's essentially with that risk, the position we're in is we're waiting for national government to announce the specifics of those areas and what's being carried forward. And there's a lot around, some announcements are coming out and some announcements aren't fully coming out. So we are in a bit of a holding pattern around that. But I believe that specific one is around plastic bottle deposits.
Right, members, any further comments on item 8? No? Thank you very much, Ryan. That's really helpful. Thank you, Alison. Okay, so the recommendation is to note it. I think we've done that. So we move on to item 9 on page 39 of your agenda, which is the internal audit progress and follow-up report. Faye, over to you. Sorry. I did this before.
Thank you so much, Chair. The first of 2 reports for you today is the committee. We went through this report a little bit in detail through the training session this morning, so I'm really hoping that you're a bit more familiar with the layout and the key points that we need to bring out as part of our discussion. So if I head straight to 2.1, we've got the last of the changes to the programme that was approved in March 2022. So there's 2 audits there that we've reprofiled. The nature of the change and the justification is included within there. As we move on to the progress update, you'll see that all of the work that was in the revised plan has now been concluded. There are 2 reports that are currently in draft stages. I'm happy to say that at 4.4, the vulnerability strategy report has been finalised now. That's no longer in draft. But as you move on to 4.7, you'll see that 2 position statements have been issued in this period. This first piece of work was for procurement and contract management and looked at the consortium arrangements. It was an advisory piece of work intended to look at the agreements between each of the partners and whether any improvements could be made to risk management and the management of the consortium itself. I've highlighted the actions that we have suggested as part of that work in 4.7. We've also got a second piece of work that was an advisory piece of work on sustainability and climate change. There's lots of activity that's happened in that area. Our main concern and risk that we wanted to provide assurance over was that any achievements in this area could be verified through evidence. And we were very satisfied that carbon auditing is taking place and that the evidence around this area can be substantiated. So a few improvement points to take forward, but otherwise in good shape. In future years, we may move to providing an assurance piece of work on this to give a grading on it. But as it's a developing area, we've chosen to go with advisory at this stage. At 4.8, we've got the Anglian Revenue Partnerships audits. They are normally concluded in Q4, so the earlier progress reports don't detail the findings. It's this one that you will find any outcomes from that work. As I explained within training, we have the ARP auditors to carry out this work, not TIA, and the results of this work is provided under each report in bullet point form. Any of these recommendations will be followed up and discussed at the OIB board going forward. But it just gives you an idea of any concerns that have been raised in key controls area for financials in revs and bends. Follow up, we've got the appendices to discuss in terms of any actions that have become overdue, and we've got some reasoning from officers to explain the delays to those. At 5.5, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we do have quite a significantly overdue action from 2019-20. Our follow-up process allows us to provide you with updates if the recommendations are urgent and important ordinarily. But actually, because this is quite a historical one, I have asked the officers to provide us with an update here and a new time frame. So a little bit more information is required there. And if you need any more information from that particular point, please let me know and I'll take that back to officers for further comment. On page 48 and 49, you've got the full plan and the gradings for each of those pieces of work. And then moving on to Appendix 2 there, we've got the executive summaries for each of the audits that we've concluded in this period. So really high level key strategic findings on the dashboard on the right hand side and the number of recommendations raised. If they don't get completed within the agreed time frame, remember that they'll come back to you as a committee later on in the report. So that's head there now. Page 58 is the start of any recommendations that are currently overdue and have surpassed their time frame for this period. So you can see there the number of times that those recommendations have been revised, a new deadline date and the latest response from officers. So please do ask any questions about this report now if you have them, and I'll try my best to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much for that, Faye. Just got one question. It might be my particular reading of the report in the layout. Under 4.4, mentioned there we've got 7 reports issued against those areas where we've got, I think 5 of those have got a reasonable assurance statement and 2 substantial. So my query is, so part of information rather than concern is where they've got reasonable, where they previously substantial or previously limited, whether they've sort of moved up or down, or if something's gone from, say, limited and then moved up to being reasonable, for example. So it might be that obviously that will correlate to other aspects of the report later on. Thank you.
Thank you for that query. Yes, I'll direct you to a later appendix within the opinion. There's a table in there with each of the auditable areas, and across a 5-year period you'll be able to see what the gradings were given in each of those areas. That might be quite a good graphic to have a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kybird.
Thank you, Chairman. Under 2.1, the business continuity and emergency planning, just for clarification, is that Breckland's business continuity, or does Breckland have a wider remit to support business continuity within the district?
I believe that's Breckland's officer.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other one on page 46, asset management, I am aware that the asset register has been the subject of a number of FOI requests, and I think we talked about that in training, but I'm just aware that a certain individual in Thetford is complaining about the lack of response to those or the lack of satisfactory responses to those requests.
Thank you for your comment. And yes, just to confirm, we do have a complaints and FOI audit profiled into this year's programme, and it's coming up over the next couple of quarters. We've added in your comments from this morning, so that will be looked at in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. David Fowler.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Faye. On 2.1, again, on planning, given that the decision has now been made to bring the service in-house, just a question really, would it be worth undertaking an internal audit now to see whether there have been any deficiencies or any issues under the management of the current contractor before the council ends that contract? And it would kind of set a baseline before the new arrangements are in place.
I think we certainly want to provide a piece of work that's going to add value. I think I'd like to have a discussion with the service area about that, if that would add value actually, and if we can provide a bit of assurance over that. It may be more of an advisory piece of work, but yes, absolutely, we do have the skills. I suspect that department is extremely busy working through some of this and may see this as, you know, could you support us in other ways? But I think it's worth having the conversation, so I'll take that back. Thank you.
Councillor Monument.
One thing that's just niggling, page 45, it's only slight and it's not strictly our concern, but Anglian Revenue Partnership audits, we have some bullet point recommendations, one of which puzzles me. The introduction of a 12-weekly credit report to be used to address historic credit amount refund delays. It occurs to me that there are 52 weeks in a year. If they have a 12-weekly credit report, it's going to get out of sync with the year, bit by bit. It'll get harder and harder. I don't know if it's occurred to anybody, but possibly 13 might be better.
That's a great suggestion, and I will most certainly feed that back to the auditors. Sounds like a much better recommendation. Thank you.
Just on page 58, we've got requests for 2 extensions, and that private sector housing and the environmental waste management. They both have fairly imminent sign-off dates, and they've asked them to be extended by a month or so. All I would say is if they are still outstanding when we next meet, I would expect to see a senior officer with them. I'm sure they won't be, but if we wait till the next meeting and then we have to wait till the meeting after that, so I'll just flag up that. But they do look very positive in that they're about to be resolved.
Yes, we are hopeful that they will be able to conclude on those, but absolutely we can invite the officers to come along and talk about that if they don't become completed. But
it looks very positive that they will, but just in case.
Thank you, Chair.
You never know. Any more comments on item 9 rather? No, we have a recommendation. All in favour? Everybody? Any comments? Right, lovely, thank you. So, Faye, still with you. On to item 10.
Thank you,
Thank you, Ryan.
Chair. This is the second report of 2 for you and summarises all of the internal audit work that has been carried out for the year 22-23 ending 31st of March. I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that the governance, risk management and control opinion for Breckland Council this year is reasonable, which is a positive. Overall, when we look at all of the areas that we've reviewed, the health of the control framework is positive. The background section to this report gives you an idea about why we have to produce this report for you as members, but I think it's more sensible if we get into the key sections, which the first of which is at 2.2, the opinion itself. So we've got some examples there out of the 17 audits that have received substantial assurance, which is the highest grading that we can possibly give as auditors. So clearly very healthy areas there in economy and growth, food, health and safety and ARP enforcement. We've got 2 areas that are currently indicating as a limited assurance this year. Just 2 out of 17, but they are areas that I do need to inform you of and make you aware of in terms of the fact that they need improvements. So we have procurement and contract management. In the previous report, you'll remember that we managed to finalise a report, an advisory piece of work on contract arrangements and consortium arrangements. This piece of work looked at the control framework in detail, so conformance with the CSOs, the contract standing orders, whether all of the contracts were contained on the register and whether this was published. We have found some significant weaknesses, but I have to say that management were already aware of these and are beginning to act on these if they hadn't already started. So we have some good commitment from the team to take this forward and resolve those issues. So I have no doubt that they will be resolved for next year's opinion. However, to be prudent, we do need to inform you of those. The second area is private sector housing. And again, we weren't telling the team anything that they didn't already know. They understand that this is a weakness. They used us as a team to help quantify those issues and bring about and work with them to produce some recommendations and actions that they could take forward to resolve the situation. Ultimately, this is going to come down to resources, and I know that the team are working very hard to make sure that they have what they need to take those points forward. So page 64 and the top of 65, those are the key issues for the council at this point in time that I need to make you aware of. Everything else looks very healthy. At section 3.3, we talk about our internal audit work, the number of days that we delivered, the kind of work that we carry out, and also the work of ARP auditors as well. At 3.4, we've given you a summary of follow-up, but obviously you've seen the progress and follow-up report at the previous agenda item, so you already understand the position that we're in there. At section 3.5, we cover those limited assurance opinions again, and we're asking the council to make reference to those within the annual governance statement until they are concluded. So we're making it really clear to stakeholders that these are the areas we need to work on. Section 5 talks about our performance. So we carry out an internal assessment against the public sector internal audit standards on an annual basis and share this with consortium members. But this year we also had an external assessment, and this was carried out by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. I've provided a table with the results of that work at Appendix 4 for you, but we had a very good report, some really great feedback from our officers, which shows the health of the consortium and gives you assurance as an audit committee that our work is carried out in conformance with the international standards and the public sector standards. So when we're bringing you these opinions, you can be comforted that you're able to rely on them. On to performance indicators. As you know, our contract is with Tier Limited, and we measure their success in delivering the plan in terms of timeliness and quality. I have no concerns over the quality. However, I'm not satisfied with the timeliness of the work in some cases. As you can see, we've got 2 key pieces of work still not in draft at year end, and from a service delivery standpoint, that's not acceptable in my view. So something that we need to work on for the year ahead. I have weekly meetings with the director to target performance. And they're hopeful that some additional resources and a different approach should see results there. So I'm hoping to report a better position for you. But that is something that we're working on as a team. The next 2 appendices are for information. And as we talked about earlier, Appendix 2 is that assurance chart. So over a 5-year period, on page 73, you can see each auditable area and what grading was given and whether the controlling framework has improved or decreased over that time. There is just a caveat to that sometimes we look at different areas. There could be new risks that have emerged from that. So it needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis, but it does give you something to reference. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, over to you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much. It's me again, Faye. Under 2.2, you've highlighted two areas of limited assurance, procurement, contract management and private sector housing. You've mentioned, my first sort of question, I'll give you the two questions in one. You've said there's a commitment, you know, that you've got in terms of progressing those, so I think it'd be helpful to know when that might be firmed up. And the other bit I'd sort of note really for information members under private sector housing, I've picked up issues in my own ward around private sector housing issues which I've raised with the housing team, but also as a result of that partly the Overview and Scrutiny Commission has now agreed that all the housing providers, housing associations will be coming along to make a presentation and be challenged at a future meeting. That's part of the work programme. That was overdue anyway, but it's also prompted a further sort of push. So there's a sort of, there can be a potential link up there. Thank you.
Thank you. And just on those two reports there, I think what we need to do is provide you with the full report. Once we've got to a position where we've been through a quality assurance process and management have agreed the timeframes for each of these recommendations, I would like to share that with you as a committee so that you can read it and then we can have questions on that and continue to monitor the progress going forward. But yeah, I have every hope and very much comforted by the team's approach to addressing these issues thus far.
I've got Councillor Kyberd and then David Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. Procurement and contract management has had two limited assurances in 5 years, and yet the strategic risk register doesn't seem to identify the problem. So I think some marrying up there needs to be done, and presumably twice in 5 years means that will get inspected sooner rather than later again. On that, and then on private sector housing, we note this week that Breckland fined a private sector landlord £40,000 for non-compliance. I wasn't aware we could issue fines of that magnitude, and the statement was made that can then further resource the team for further action. But that's a whole area that perhaps either us or scrutiny need to understand the whole process better. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think the risk point, absolutely, it is a holistic approach where we pick things from the strategic risk register. We provide you with assurance that they are the score that they are. If actually through testing, independent evidence collection, we find that they're not, we would then need to feed that back to the strategic risk register so it can be reconsidered. So that can definitely be taken forward. And yes, the private sector housing stuff, I think it's definitely worth understanding that process in more detail and how it's going to develop, because there's certainly actions in place now that mean that there's going to be more work carried out in that area, as I understand.
Just on both of those, so the first one I mentioned earlier on, so yes, you're saying the marrying up of the risk register and the issues that we found with contract management. So I think that, Ryan, as you're here, that would be great if we could pick that point up. And just on the business of fines are a good thing because they help to resource the team, I'm slightly concerned that might send the wrong message. You know, if something is done that deserves a fine, then that should be proportionate to what's happened. And the idea that there's an incentive for fines because that helps resource the team, I worry about that and the politics of that, but more so with the fairness. So, you know, Councillor Kyberd's already asked if we could have a look at it, but I'd be interested if next time we see this we could have some sort of clarity around that. Sorry, Councillor Cowan, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I do. It's on that point of the fines. The fine isn't £40,000. It's two numbers. It's two £20,000, and the reason there are two £20,000, and one of them was for the director, was that they were required to undertake remedial works and they failed to do so. So the fine structure is quite interesting. You know, you're told you do something and you don't do it, and then you refuse to do it. so you get a personal fine as well. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And it also needs to, we also need, I think, to understand the context, because that fine was issued to a landlord who has an HMO. And HMOs are quite challenging for the council and any council to manage.
So HMO is a house of multiple occupation.
Indeed they are. And we have a lot of them in Norfolk, let alone in Breckland, because of the nature of the workforce, particularly related to agriculture and agriculture-related industry. So I think it sends a message, I hope, that where we do lean on private sector landlords, who are fundamentally different in this context from the housing associations, as we heard, they're coming to scrutiny. But private sector landlords are a completely different organisation, if you like. It sends a message that if we do pick you up on certain irregularities, it really behoves you to get on and sort them out. And there's very little other sanction we have, to be honest. And picking up your point earlier, Chairman, about central government legislation relating to private sector rentals, I think it really does focus and shine a light on a part of the sector over which we have very little control directly, but indirectly we can influence quite significantly. And I do know the housing team hold regular meetings with private sector landlords to encourage them to improve the quality of their rental market. Thank you.
Thank you. Faye, did you want to add anything?
Just that I think, exactly as you said, the controls in the framework need to be fair, don't they? And actually reward those landlords that are acting in accordance with legislation. And then there is then the ability to sanction those that aren't. And within the control framework, there's obviously a means test and case test. And actually, that's what we need to get to, a fair process. But yes, taking all of those comments on board about more info required, I think, so that we can satisfy ourselves as a committee that that's heading in a reasonable direction or even substantial in the future, I think would be useful.
David, did you have anything more?
Just back to procurement and contract management, on page 64 and 66, we see that 71 of the contracts are currently expired. It'd be helpful if that was given as a percentage. I've no idea, are there 10,000 contracts or are there 72? Just to give it some context. And then I think you already covered it, Faye, actually, on page the poor audit performance on page 69 there. You've given an explanation for that, and I guess it's when will the committee see likely to see an improvement in that and some revised figures?
Thank you for your first comment. Totally taking that on board. That would have been very useful, so I'll have a look at that. In terms of the performance, by the next time that we come to the committee, we want to see a healthy amount of work completed in the plan, and we don't profile the year equally, so we won't have 25% of the work done in Q1. We need to make sure it's more fluid and that it is in line with what the officers can support, but we should start to see some work coming through. You may remember at the meeting of September last year, we had nothing to report. So that's how I think we will see whether an improvement has been made. But it's definitely an area that, as you can appreciate, I'm working on and trying to encourage us to, just for the officers as well, to understand when the work's coming back, when they can expect to see a draft report. It is fair to them to receive a good service from us, and that's what I'm really trying to work towards.
Okay, any further comments or questions from Councillor Kaibo?
Just a wider question on private sector housing. It's, I think, now illegal to rent out a property of a poor energy rating, but I don't know whose responsibility it is to monitor or enforce that.
A question to confirm with the service area, because I don't know off the top of my head, but yes, we'll have a look and get you an answer on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, right, members, we have a set of recommendations here which I'll read out. to receive and approve the contents of the annual report and opinion of the Head of Internal Audit. 2, to note that a reasonable audit opinion has been given in relation to governance, risk management and control for the year ended the 31st of March 2023. 3, to note that the opinions expressed, together with the significant matters arising from the internal audit work and contained within this report, should be given due consideration when developing and reviewing the Council's annual governance statement for 2022-2023. And 4, to note the conclusions of the review of the effectiveness of internal audit. All in favour, please show. Anyone against? That is passed. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to, thank you for that, Kay. We move on to item 11, the Auditor's Annual Report, year ending the 31st of March 2022, which starts on page 77 of your agenda packs. Alison, over to you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, neither Mark Hodgson or Andrew Taylor could be here today due to other commitments, but I have some of the key messages from Mark, just to some bullet points from the report that he would like to highlight. So what he said was, it has been another good audit with very few issues of substance to report to you. The timeline of the audit was hampered by national issues around infrastructure assets and also pension triennial valuations. And they all took time to resolve nationally, and that then impacted on the time to clear them locally. They say they've been supported during the audit and they're very grateful to the finance team. And they have included their value for money commentary within the report, which explains how they were satisfied that the Council had adequate arrangements in place during the year under review, 21-22. And then they're going to turn our attention to the 22-23 audits now. And they say in line with correspondence that they sent to Chief Finance Officers, which means that all of those audits won't start any earlier than November this year, due to their other audits continuing from prior years. And also subject to any announcements made by DLUC, because they are looking at ways to resolve the backlog at the moment. So that was from Mark's point of view. From a Breckland perspective, these accounts were reviewed at the last audit committee meeting with delegated approval to sign off. We would have liked to thank EY if they were here for changing their timetabling to allow them to finalise all of the capital asset elements before the 31st of March this year, which meant we could close off 22-23. So that was helpful from them. And I'm really pleased that the accounts were signed off before this meeting, because Breckland are actually only one of 20% of English councils that have had 21-22 signed off. So I'm proud of that for us. And then EY will come back during the summer sometime to give dates when they think the 22-23 will start. And if there's any questions at all, I'm more than happy to take them back to Mark and his team.
Thank you very much, Alison. Obviously, it's sad that Mark can't be here, but thank you for your report. And we have the report. Members, any questions? Councillor Kybird.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the team should be congratulated on both achieving an early result and a sort of a top 20% result. We have a good history of getting things done as soon as we can. There's one line within the report that says the Council should not be complacent about efficiency savings. I find that slightly unusual wording for an audit report.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I do agree with that. We shouldn't be complacent. And as part of our financial reporting to Cabinet and scrutiny, we will continue to report at how we're achieving against our efficiency targets, because it will be key to balancing our budget in the future.
I do agree, though, for an audit report, that would suggest that he's found that we are complacent. And I wouldn't suggest that that was true, and I'd be interested to know how he measured that. So I think there's a sort of catch-all, and I noticed in the value for money, the Council should continue to identify relevant schemes to achieve annual savings requirements to minimise the use of reserves where possible as well. Anyway, you can obviously take that back from Councillor Kybird. Thank you. Any other comments from members of the committee? No, it's a large document. We are asked to note it. So are you happy that we note it? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So we now move on to item 12, which is the unaudited statement of accounts for 2022-2023, which is on page 93 of your agendas. And Matthew Fernandez-Graham, you are leading on this. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the draft unaudited accounts were published on the 31st of May, which was the deadline, and that was we were in a group of about a third of councils managed to achieve that deadline nationally. Just a couple of points to draw out in the accounts. You'll see on what was page 17 of the accounts document, just some explanation of the purpose of the main statements.
What agenda? What page number was the?
Sorry, agenda page 115. Sorry, please. So that's just by way of information to understand the accounts. In terms of the performance that the accounts are showing, the general fund balance has reduced by £157,000 this year, though it's still above the minimal balance that we have set, which is a minimum balance of 2.5 million on the general fund. You will see when you look at the balance sheet in the accounts, there has been a very large change in the pension liability, a large reduction, £36 million reduction due to the triennial valuation. So that's where the actuaries review all the assumptions and valuations for the Norfolk pension scheme, and this is in common with other councils in that scheme, that the figures have improved substantially, which has no immediate impact on the council's finances, but obviously it's good to know that the scheme is more likely to be affordable in the long term. There is still a liability, but it's a lot lower than it was, and there is a contribution the council makes every year to bring the scheme into being fully funded over a period of 20 years. So that's what I wanted to draw out from the accounts, and just then respond to questions.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, over to you. Any questions or comments for the officer? David Fowler.
Just a very minor one. I don't know if it's my copy or not, but on pages 106, 107 and 108, there's text missing in the box on the right-hand side. And given that this is a public-facing document, I'm not sure that typeface, that font meets the accessibility standards. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies on the document that's on the website. It looks correct, but something has gone very strange with mod.gov. We had to change the entire font of the document to get it into mod.gov. So yeah, apologies. Some of it has gone a little bit wayward in this agenda document.
Councillor Monument and Councillor Kybert.
I just wanted to endorse that and point out that what it actually leaves us with is with a mystery segment in each of those cases. In the case of page 106, it leaves us with a 27% mystery, as far as I can see. The others are smaller, but yes, I was concerned about the same.
Councillor Kybert.
Thank you. I think the global picture is that we were, for reasons beyond our control, vastly overspent on housing costs, and we were lucky to get that offset by having cash reserves on which we achieved unexpectedly large interest.
Councillor Cow.
Yeah, if I can come back on that one. It's the swings and roundabouts. I mean, most people find, as we know, when interest rates rise, it becomes quite a burden on us. However, there is an upside for a council because we actually get a better rate of return on our investments when savings rates go up. So that's, it's a kind of double-edged sword, but it works in our favour, thank goodness, in this case.
Yes, and I would say that Breckland is extremely unusual, having no or very small amount of borrowings, and therefore, while this might be put other councils under stress, it is a bonus for Breckland. So thank you for pointing that out, Councillor. Any other comments on the unaudited accounts for 2022-2023? No? Okay, well the recommendation here is to review and note the unaudited statement of accounts and the draft annual governance statement for 2022-2023. Are you happy that we've done that? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, so we move on to the next item, which is item 13, which is on page 204 of your agendas, and that's the Treasury Management Outturn Report for the year 2022-2023. And Alison, or is it you, Matthew? Matthew, you're leading on it, right?
So this report covers the Treasury Management performance and whether we've been compliant with the regulatory requirements that we have from SITFA and the department, which we have in all cases complied with the relevant codes and regulations. I think the key thing this year that is we have moved into in a position where we are borrowing internally from our cash. We have substantial investments, but we are using some of that cash to cover the capital expenditure. So you'll see on page 205 the capital financing requirement has increased to nearly £2 million, and that's a cheaper way of financing the capital programme than if we were to borrow externally. There is obviously still a cost because we're not able to invest that money in suitable counterparties. The other point that has already been pointed out in terms of the income that we've got on our investments has increased substantially this year and was 858,000 for the year, so that which is the highest it's been for over a decade, given how interest rates have gone up every month that I've been here. And we expect them to go up even further in about an hour,
right.
and in future as well. And the performance is good, but even though we're getting, if we put money out as we have done for 12 months, you can get 5%. That's now 6%. Over 6% you can get for 12 months, but that is still lower than the rate of inflation. So actually, in real terms, we're still not keeping up with inflation, but clearly it does help. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments on the report? No? Okay. Well, we have a recommendation. So the recommendations are to approve the actual 22-23 prudential indicators within this report and to note the Treasury Management Annual Report for 22-23 Appendix B and Appendix C of the report. All those in favour, please show.
That's not your recommendation.
Sorry, I'm the one before, aren't I? The recommendation is to review and note the unaudited statement of...
It's the council.
It's recommended for council. We're recommending that to council.
Yes, correct.
So this is item 13. Okay, well then I have a different recommendation on my chairman's agenda. Let me just pull up.
Sorry, this is the chairman's agenda as well.
recommendation, it's just a full council.
Yeah.
I see, right, okay. Fine. Okay, so the recommendation is to recommend this to full council. All in favour, please show. Anyone against? Thank you very much. Okay, so that goes off. Thank you for... Glad the committee is awake. Okay, so we now move to item 14 on page 228, which is the work programme. Right. Any comments or members? So we meet again on the 28th of September and then on the 7th of December. The meetings have got more bunched because of the fitting the timetable of the audit. But is there any comments from any members on the work programme? Councillor Kybert.
It's got Q2 risk report in September, but Q3 risk report seems to have disappeared off the planet.
Ryan.
Yeah, so the Q3 one just hasn't been scheduled in yet, and the Q4 one hasn't. That's a task I've got for tomorrow. The only other one, just to pick up on that, is the risk management policy, which is down for the 22nd of June, will be brought on the 28th of September as well. That was just to do with internal sign-off dates not matching up. So that will come then as well, alongside the Q2, and the Q3 and Q4 will be on when we look at this in September.
Okay, happy. Any other comments? Okay. So there's nothing else to add. The next meeting is, the date of the next meeting, item 15, is Thursday the 28th of September at 10 a.m. in here. So I now formally close the meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance.
We seem to be missing a member from the previous notice.
Yes, it has speeded the meetings up somewhat, hasn't it? Thank you all very much for your attendance.